So I'll just do some introductions here. We have Will Brown, Director of Control Risks. We have Andy Edwards, Vice President from GardaWorld International Protective Services. We have Deputy Commandant Joshua Ibiloye. Have I got that right?
Ibiloye.
Okay. Who's representing Dr. Ahmed Ubaka from the Nigeria Security and Civil Defense Corps. And we have Wadih on the end from Astrophysics.
Thank you.
So, and today's panel will be around critical infrastructure and the importance with smart cities. So if I sort of kick off, I'm going to throw this to you, Will. In terms of a smart city, whether it be Dubai, whether it be a project like NEOM in Saudi or anything else around that sort of ilk, how important is the protection of critical infrastructure to a successful operation of a smart city?
The obvious answer to that is it's absolutely critical, both in terms of protecting the city on an ongoing basis, but also contributing to the success of that city. One of the issues with smart cities is the interconnectedness of data. If citizens or potential citizens are worried that their data is not secured, for example, that is going to be a significant component to people wanting to live there or not. So just in that element alone is absolutely essential.
So, and if I move across to you, Andy, around the protection of critical infrastructure, what are some of the views that GardaWorld has around the importance to the livability of an environment?
Yeah, so I think as a collective, we think of critical infrastructure as power, as oil and gas, as water, communications, all the obvious stuff. But I think it's a much broader space than that. If COVID-19 has taught us one thing, it's that public health is the ultimate, or the best example anybody could come up with of a part of critical infrastructure, or part of the critical infrastructure, smart city or other, that can bring a city to its knees in a moment. And I think we've all, as organizations and a whole raft of different foreign governments, have just kind of failed to handle this. And it could be the smartest city in the world. It doesn't matter because we can't move around. Food security is the other one I think that's worthy of mention. The impact that the war in Ukraine has had on food security. Again, food still needs to come. The UAE has got. Yes, it's got a fantastic smart city in Dubai, but it's also got a growing agricultural sector, and has been, again, brought down to its knees by the situation in Ukraine and what impact that's had in Eastern Europe and some of their investments there.
Thanks, Andy. So Joshua, if I come across to you and talk about critical infrastructure, from a different perspective than we have in this part of the world, what are the important elements that Nigeria sees around critical infrastructure? When we talk about critical infrastructure, what comes to your mind, and what are the big issues that people want protected?
Well, critical infrastructures are put in place to make life easy for people, and then to make people go through life seamlessly. From the part of the world where I come from, we don't have smart cities yet. I think our cities are still dull, and we're trying to teach them to be smart. One of the major problems we have, and it's making it difficult, is the fact that there's no power. There's no adequate power supply. For you to have a smart city, you need power to drive, the protection of critical infrastructure. Also in Nigeria, you observe that, I'm sure you must have seen in the news, that we're grappling with some security challenges. Majorly, Nigeria depends on oil and gas. And some of these infrastructures are being vandalized by vandals, local vandals. And in the northern part of the country also, we have issues, security issues with ISWAP. We have the Boko Haram terrorists, and they tend to attack critical infrastructure, which includes maybe bridges, you have telecommunication masts, you have power lines also are being affected. But the Nigerian Security and Civil Defense Corps has a mandate to protect critical infrastructure. We call it critical national assets and infrastructure. And to a large extent, we're doing the best we can do to protect this infrastructure. But it's not been easy, I must confess. Probably because we've not really deployed adequate technology to man this. And like I told you, we are not smart yet. We're moving towards smartness.
Thank you. And at the end, Wadih, in terms of astrophysics being a provider of equipment, particularly sort of known for the X-ray equipment and so forth, how do you find that your customers are wanting to adopt your product to protect their infrastructure? What are their strategies and thoughts that they tell you?
Dubai is one of the fewest cities in the world which has adopted a unique approach to evolve into a smart city. And since I'm coming from a security field specialized in X-ray systems, Dubai succeeded in using integrated security solutions such as security automated systems, fire automated systems, which of course includes anti-theft alarm systems, fire alarm systems, X-ray security inspection for baggage and parcels, metal detection for personnel who are entering the facilities, and we believe it is crucial nowadays to invest in modern technologies for the auto-detection of threats based on artificial intelligence. So what we have done is that we came up with artificial intelligence software that can be easily integrated in any X-ray inspection system, whether it is for checkpoint or big bags, for the auto-detect of guns, knives, liquid containers, explosives, shielded objects, and even lithium batteries. So AI, which is artificial intelligence, helps in protecting critical infrastructure from critical threats. It is very easy to be used. It can be easily integrated. No personnel training is required. And it's a machine learning. So the more we learn the machine and analyze images, the more we can identify threats. To tell you quickly how it works, it automatically detects threats in a colored box, and each color refers to the type of threat which has been detected.
So if we sort of move across, and I'm going to jump on you, Andy, for this one, about looking at some of the associations and partnerships formed in parts of the region that you're responsible for the protection of critical infrastructure. What are some of the, I guess, the challenges and maybe some of the successes around these associations and partnerships that you've been dealing with?
Yeah, looking at I think the UAE is just a fantastic example of a country that through partnerships has built what we're all here within today. It's arguably the safest city in the world. And it's all been done through partnerships with technology partners, service providers, consulting groups, with innovative companies, individuals, in coordination with foreign governments. And I think it really is an example of how things should be done on a much larger scale. We work quite closely with companies that work in the construction of infrastructure projects of CNI, what will later become critical national infrastructure across a wide number of different countries. And it's very much a kind of B2B or G2B, B2B relationship. We're the service provider, we secure that facility and those people whilst that construction is going on. And then there's a handover to the government. And there's, at that point, in most of the countries, probably with the exception of the UAE right now, where there is a kind of closer relationship with the service provider whilst handing over to the government in a transition phase. But we see it very, very rarely, to be honest with you. But I think just the key point there, here in particular, over and above any other country I've ever visited, the collaboration between private and public sector is just absolutely phenomenal. And you've just got to look at Edge and the 300 companies within it through partnerships and bringing in specialists from different parts of the world. You've got to look at all of the services they provide for the defense, interior, and aerospace sectors. You look at ADQ and Mubadala and all of the partnerships they've done for food security, for shipping and agriculture and all these other, it's all been done through partnerships, private-public partnerships, joint venture, or direct investment. I think it's just a fantastic success story. Thanks,
Andy. And Joshua, if I follow the same theme around a Nigerian sort of partnerships for success, in your role around security and civil defence, what are some of the partnerships that you've seen that have worked, and what are some of those success stories?
What I've observed in Nigeria is the fact that for you to be able to protect critical national asset and infrastructure, like we referred to, you need all stakeholders to come together. There are some assets that are not owned by government, but majorly, most infrastructures are owned by government. Telecommunication masts are owned by corporate organizations and not government, but we have a need to protect those as well. And so there is that partnership with telecom companies, with power holding companies. We also have partnership with construction companies to ensure that some of these facilities are protected. The citizens also have a role to play. The infrastructures are put in place for them to be able to live a seamless life, live life easily, and they also have a role to play. So that partnership, to a large extent, seems to have been helping us. We're not there yet, but gradually would definitely get there.
Oh, look, thank you. It's warming to hear that you've extended a partnership with the community, because they're the ones that I guess, reap the huge benefit. And Will, on the same sort of theme, and I guess you're working much more in a sort of in your role in a regional sort of partnership model, but how does that work for you?
So one of the elements around creating smart cities is making sure that you get the components that will make the environment safe and secure established from the outset. To do that is everybody, and clearly the kind of the elephant in the room, if you like, is look at the number of smart cities that are being in the process of being developed in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. To actually get that city established and to get it smart and safe and secure requires a massive amount of coordination and partnership between all of the various stakeholders. And just going back to one of the points you made in one of the questions earlier, another really key component around this is around the livability of the environments that are being created. We can create an incredibly secure city, but it would take guards, guns, gates, cameras, and that's not what is required. And if we look at Vision 2030 in Saudi Arabia, and in fact, a lot of the kind of the drives in the region at the moment, that requirement for secure, livable cities is absolutely key. So you need to make sure that from a partnership point of view, that you've got security and security considerations built in from absolute concept right the way through to operations, and that is a fundamental component of making sure that you've got your stakeholders aligned, bought in, engaged, and without being miserable about it, you need more stick than carrot to make sure that every element in those stakeholders and every element in the development is maintaining the security vision and the security requirement of that smart environment. And I think that takes genuine partnership and that takes genuine alliances. Some of the other things we see, and I'm not just going to go straight down a cyber rabbit hole. The National Cybersecurity Council, things like DESC here. You've got the NSC in Saudi Arabia, and the NSC is looking at security and resilience across the entire kingdom. And to be able to do that, you've got to rely on identifying your stakeholders and making sure your partners are within those and that everybody is aligned to give you that view of national security, national risk, or national resilience.
So following on Andy, going to follow on this theme around sort of national level critical infrastructure, and where if we asked, I guess, a survey 10, 15 years ago about critical infrastructure, it all would have been utilities and nothing but utilities, and now it's much, much broader. In your sort of consulting role, how do you see that your clientele is adopting a much broader view on critical infrastructure, and what are their challenges?
Good question.
Do you want me to come back to that one?
I took a look at what what's rolled up within what's construed to be national infrastructure just a few days back, and there were probably about 15 different areas, and some that were much less obvious. So obviously there was power, there was oil and gas, communications, water, food security is, I think, probably the one that stood out, jumped off the page for a couple of reasons. One, and this was in the UAE context. One, because the UAE has invested heavily in certain countries where war and terrorism have had a significant impact on everything in those countries, but particularly on UAE investment, which has affected food assurance and food security for the UAE and for other countries across the region. So Ukraine has had a massive impact on food security here. And I'm not talking about a can of beans, I'm talking about grain and feed for animals. But even more so, I think, with Saudi. And so, working out how they might go about, finding ways in which to not just solve the problem, but ensure that they don't face with those problems in the future is a really interesting part to play for us. So as we look at ways in which to mitigate those risks, and how we look at ways in which to help them ensure that their investments are secure. So there's a big push on the part of ADQ here in vertical farming, because there's very little arable land here, and so they build up and in air-conditioned vertical units in order that farming can be done here locally as part of a wider food security strategy. And I just find that space right now particularly interesting, and it's something that we've been working quite closely with the government here on just over the past few months. So, not the extent of my consulting experience, to be honest with you.
So, but it sounds like that the clients that you work with have a much more expanded view on what is critical infrastructure.
I think a much more expanded view generally of what risk management companies can do for them to manage and mitigate all of the risks that their business is exposed to, right the way through the supply chain. And it's a really interesting role for us, I think.
Thank you. And Joshua, as sort of not just Nigeria, but more of a sort of an African model, have you had many challenges or successes around working with critical infrastructure where people look at, food security now is critical for us? What are the other sorts of critical elements that people are now considering? What have you experienced?
Can you take the question again?
So in terms of sort of the African region around Nigeria, we've looked at critical infrastructure moving from purely utilities 10 years ago to today. How is the African approach changing? Is food security becoming seen as critical? Is the economic financial system being seen as critical? Where are the African governments sort of looking for what's being called now critical infrastructure?
Well, we have a problem in Nigeria presently. And, he mentioned food security, where we at a point we're almost drifting towards food insecurity in Nigeria, because we're also grappling with farmers-herders clashes. And that led the government to create a squad that is referred to the Agro Ranger Squad to help create a green corridor. It's referred to as a green corridor that helps protect the farmers on their farm, and then also help escort the farm produce from the farm to the end user or to the market. That we've been able to do. Also, government is also aware of the fact that the ground force cannot really deal with the protection of critical national assets and infrastructure. And so the deployment of technology is growing by the day, both with government and private security. And job security is also something of concern. And so a lot of youths are also drifting towards that area. I think so far we've been able to achieve a lot in that area as well.
And thank you. And you raised a very interesting concept of job security in today's youth. So, and you also raised about technology. And I'm going to go across to Wadih and say, what sort of requests and information do you think that as a provider to end users, what are they sort of beginning to experience? Are they coming to you and saying, we love what you do here and we've now got worries over here? Is some of this technology transferable? What should we be considering?
The main problem is that they should be investing in the right solution, the right security solution, whether it is an X-ray inspection system for luggage or parcels, whether it is for cargo, whether it is for passenger vehicles, trucks, whether it is for metal detection or gamma radiation. So we always face issues because the customer or the government, they cannot choose sometimes properly the right solution in order to protect the critical infrastructural facilities. That's why we believe that collaboration between government and private investments in research and development will help in coming up with new security solutions and come up with new security strategies to protect these facilities. And protecting the national cyber and physical critical infrastructure and making it more resilient, it is a national imperative and everyone has a stake in it.
Thank you. And Will, I'm going to come back to you for this one around, as we look ahead with our crystal ball, so to speak, and I'll ask Andy a follow-on. What are the sort of the key risks that around critical infrastructure that we should be thinking about in the future?
So obviously the key risks at the moment, and from a kind of the risk prevalence point of view, is around the interconnectedness of the infrastructure that's in place. So one of the benefits of being smart is that you can have single points of access into a time myriad of things. One of the downsides of that is it does expose you to consistent risks. So one of the things we're seeing at the moment is a massive increase in attacks on operational technologies in critical national infrastructure. That's a horrible sentence. And the operational technology are the ones that actually control things like power generation, power distribution, water distribution, sanitation. And it's one of the elements where digital risk and physical risk absolutely converge. Because if somebody creates a digital attack on physical environment, the way that manifests itself is something goes bang, or the lights go off, or your water stops being safe to drink, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think those threats are areas we're going to see increase, I'm afraid. And it's quite interesting if we look at the moment about this, kind of what's going on in the world and ransomware. I think everybody's talked about ransomware quite a lot over the last couple of years. With the situation that is ongoing now, we've actually seen a quite dramatic drop in ransomware. And that is for a number of different reasons. One of which is that the people deploying these methods of attack can no longer access anonymized technology because of sanctions. They can't pay for them, so they can't deploy these attacks. Now, that's all good news. The downside being that our threat analysts have identified that what these groups are doing is they are coordinating using, and I'm afraid this is not a joke, using this downtime in activity for R&D. So they are developing their encryption technologies. They're improving their deployment capability. They're even improving their kind of negotiation tactics around extortion. So it may be a very short term what's coming next, but I think, sadly, we can anticipate a massive ramp up of ransomware attacks on critical national infrastructure, because that's where these guys are going to get the biggest bang for their buck, and it's how you can leverage a political situation to your benefit in the fastest possible time. So that's one thing we're going to see. And I think the other elements are around energy availability. Energy availability is clearly something that we're all looking at, thinking about all the time. You just need to ask countries like South Africa what the impacts of not preparing for the next generation of power generation are on the country. And I think with the situation again with Russia and the availability of carbons from there, energy availability is going to be a threat to critical national infrastructure going forward.
Thank you, Will. And closing comments from you, Andy, around the future sort of threats and trends we should worry about?
Cyber, I think, is the obvious one to throw out there. First and foremost, I think Will's covered off really nicely. Information, disinformation. I think people are getting much better at these disinformation initiatives, and COVID-19 vaccine hesitancy is a fantastic example of how disinformation, if designed in the right way, can have a huge impact on the global economy, I mean, COVID hesitancy, I think in general terms, just prolonged this agony much longer than it perhaps should have. And our inability to detect and prevent those negative comments posted all over social media on the part of state and non-state actors needs to improve. Otherwise, it's just going to continue to get worse. But, all roads lead back to war and terrorism, across the region. And I think that, war and terrorism has already had a significant impact on a number of countries across the region. The UAE perhaps more than any, despite the fact that there's been very little going on within the UAE. It's had a significant impact. You look at agri projects that have been impacted, or agri investments that have been impacted by the war in Ethiopia, agri projects that have been impacted by the war in Ukraine, oil and gas LNG projects that have been impacted on the north of Mozambique, as opposed to ISIS affiliates, Boko Haram affiliates kind of moving from southern Tanzania and literally closed down a massive energy project that could have helped fill some of those energy gaps across and into South Africa in the future. I think war and terrorism can't be overlooked at all, as we tend to all focus our attentions now on those first two key areas, information and cyber.
Thank you, and you put your hands together for the panel. We've run out of time, so thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen.